The American dream didn't die on its own. Someone killed it on purpose. Act 1, the setup, the numbers that broke everything. Right now, the median home price in the United States is $420,000. The median household income is $74,000 a year. Run the math. A family earning the national average would need to spend every single dollar they make, before taxes, before food, before gas, for nearly 6 years straight just to afford the down payment. That's not a housing market. That's a hostage situation. But here's what nobody tells you. This wasn't an accident. It wasn't inflation. It wasn't COVID. It wasn't millennials spending too much on avocado toast. This was engineered. And the people who engineered it are getting richer every single month you can't afford to buy. In 1950, a 30-year-old with a factory job could buy a house. A real house. 3 bedrooms, a yard, a garage. The mortgage payment was maybe 15% of his take-home pay. Today, that same purchase would eat 45% of a college-educated professional's salary. That's not gradual change. That's a system that fundamentally broke, and it broke for a reason. Let's start with the number that explains everything. 1.5 million. That's roughly how many new housing units America needs to build every year just to keep up with population growth and household formation. For the last 2 decades, the country has been building far less than that. Some years as few as 500,000 units. You do that for 20 years, and you end up short by somewhere between 3 and 7 million homes. 3 to 7 million homes that don't exist. And into that vacuum, into that enormous yawning gap between supply and demand, walk some of the most powerful financial entities in the world. They didn't come to live, they came to own. Act 2. How Wall Street Bought Your Neighborhood, March 2012. The housing market is still in ruins from the 2008 crash. Foreclosure signs dot entire subdivisions in Phoenix, in Atlanta, in Tampa, in Las Vegas. Millions of American families have just been wiped out. They lost their homes, their savings, their credit, and they did what people do when everything collapses. They started renting. That's when the phone calls started at Blackstone Group headquarters in New York. Blackstone is the largest alternative asset management firm in the world. At that moment, they controlled over $200 billion in assets. Their clients were pension funds, sovereign wealth funds, and billionaires. And someone in that building looked at a spreadsheet and saw something extraordinary. Distressed single-family homes in Sunbelt cities were selling at 40, 50, sometimes 60 cents on the dollar. Rental demand was exploding because millions of former homeowners now had no choice but to rent, and interest rates were essentially zero. The numbers were perfect, almost obscenely perfect. So they moved. Blackstone created a new company called Invitation Homes. They didn't buy one house, they didn't buy 10. They bought 80,000 homes in 18 months. Think about what that means logistically. At peak acquisition, Invitation Homes was purchasing homes in cities like Atlanta and Phoenix at a rate of one house every 15 minutes, around the clock. They hired teams of analysts to scan the MLS, the same multiple listing service that regular buyers use, and programmed algorithms to flag any house that met their criteria. 3 bedrooms near a good school district in a neighborhood where median incomes were high enough to support rental rates. The algorithm would flag it. A team member would place a cash offer. No inspection contingency, no financing contingency, close in 7 days. A normal family trying to buy that same house would need 30 to 45 days to get a mortgage approved. The family never had a chance. By 2017, 6 of the largest institutional landlords in America own more than 200,000 single-family homes combined. By 2022, that number had climbed past 500,000. Today, institutional investors, firms with more than 1,000 properties, own roughly 3% of single-family rental homes in America. You might say, 3%? That's not that much. Here's why that's the wrong way to think about it. These investors don't buy everywhere. They concentrate. In certain zip codes of Atlanta, institutional investors own more than 30% of single-family rental homes. In parts of Charlotte, in areas of Phoenix, in specific suburbs of Dallas and Jacksonville. 30% of a neighborhood in the hands of one entity doesn't just affect the rental market, it sets the price floor for every home on every street around it. When Invitation Homes raises rent by $200 a month, every landlord within a mile radius knows they can raise rent too, because the biggest player just told them what the market will bear. And here's where it gets worse. Invitation Homes went public on the New York Stock Exchange in 2017. It raised $1.77 billion in its IPO. the largest real estate IPO in American history at that time. Now it wasn't just a company that owned houses. It was a publicly traded company with quarterly earnings calls, shareholder expectations, and an obligation to grow. Grow means acquire more, raise rents, reduce expenses, extract maximum value from each asset. Each asset is someone's home. Asset 3. The zoning trap. The government's role in your misery. Here's the part that surprises people. The government helped build this trap, not through one dramatic decision, through 50 years of small ones. It starts with zoning. After World War II, American cities made a choice. They decided to separate everything. You live here, you shop there, you work somewhere else, and you get around by car. The result is what urban planners call single-family zoning, a legal designation that covers roughly 75% of all residential land in most American cities. What single-family zoning means in plain English? On this land, you are legally forbidden from building anything other than one house, not two houses, not a small apartment building, not a duplex. One house. In Tokyo, a city of 14 million people, housing prices have barely moved in 3 decades. Not because Japan has some magic ingredient. Because Tokyo allows density. You can build apartment buildings in residential neighborhoods. You can build mixed use. Supply keeps up with demand because the law allows it to. In San Francisco, it is still technically illegal to build an apartment building in approximately 38% of the city's residential land. San Francisco, a city where a studio apartment rents for $3,000 a month, has more land legally zoned for golf courses than for multifamily housing. So why hasn't this changed? Because of who shows up to city council meetings. Studies of local zoning hearings consistently show the same demographic dominating public comment. Older homeowners, people who already own property. And here's their incentive structure. They bought their homes for $200,000. Today, those homes are worth $800,000. Their retirement depends on that number going up. More supply means prices stabilize or drop, so they show up. Every meeting, every hearing, every vote. They have a name in housing policy circles. NIMBYs, not in my backyard. They will tell you they're worried about traffic, about neighborhood character, about parking. What they're actually protecting is the appreciation of their single largest financial asset. The result is a construction system so choked with permitting requirements, environmental reviews, neighborhood opposition processes, and bureaucratic delays that the cost to build a new home in California has exceeded $600,000 per unit in some cities, before a single nail goes into a wall. Developers don't build workforce housing at those costs. They can't. The math doesn't work, so they build luxury. High-end condos where the margins are fat enough to survive the regulatory gauntlet, and the people who needed the workforce housing keep renting, keep paying more, keep falling further behind. Act 4, the mortgage machine, how the interest rate changed everything. For a brief, strange window between 2020 and 2021, something happened that had never happened in American history. Mortgage rates hit 2.65%. The Federal Reserve, trying to prevent an economic collapse during the pandemic, flooded the financial system with money. They dropped the federal funds rate to essentially zero. Mortgage rates followed. For about 18 months, borrowing money to buy a house was almost free. Prices exploded. When your monthly payment on a $400,000 home at 3% interest is roughly the same as the monthly payment on a $250,000 home at 6% interest, people buy the more expensive house. Demand surged. Supply didn't. Prices rocketed. The median home price jumped 45% in 2 years. Then in 2022, the Federal Reserve did what it does when inflation gets out of control. It raised rates. Fast. By late 2023, the 30-year fixed mortgage rate had climbed to 8%, a level not seen since 2000. And here's the trap nobody saw coming. The people who bought or refinanced between 2020 and 2022 locked in those 2% and 3% rates. Now they're sitting on mortgages they will never, ever willingly give up. Because if you sell your house with a 2.8% mortgage, you have to get a new mortgage at 7%. Your monthly payment on the same loan amount more than doubles. So they don't move, they stay. They lock the door from the inside. Housing economists call this the lock-in effect. In practice, what it means is that existing inventory, homes for sale, has dried up to historically low levels. People who have homes won't sell them. People who don't have homes can't afford to buy one. The market froze, prices stayed elevated. First-time buyers got squeezed from both sides. Low inventory keeping prices high, high rates making monthly payments crushing. Run the real numbers. A $400,000 home at 3% interest. Monthly payment of roughly $1,686. That same $400,000 home at 7% interest. Monthly payment of roughly $2,661. That's $975 more every single month, $11,700 more every year, $351,000 more over the life of the loan for the same house. This is why first-time homebuyer rates have collapsed. In the early 1980s, first-time buyers made up about 44% of the housing market. By 2023, that number had fallen to 26%, the lowest ever recorded. Act 5. The rent trap. When renting also became unaffordable. You might be thinking, okay, I just won't buy. I'll rent. Welcome to the second trap. Average rent for a 2-bedroom apartment in America is now over $2,000 a month nationwide. In major metros, it's far higher. Boston, $3,200. Miami, $2,800. Los Angeles, $3,100. Even secondary cities like Austin and Nashville have seen rents double since 2019. The Department of Housing and Urban Development defines a household as rent-burdened if they spend more than 30% of their income on housing. By that definition, nearly 50% of all American renters are currently rent-burdened, almost half. And cost-burdened renters, those spending more than 50% of income on rent, now number over 12 million households. 12 million American families spending more than half of everything they earn just to keep a roof over their heads. Nothing left for savings. Nothing left to build toward a down payment. Nothing left for emergencies. They're on a treadmill that accelerates faster than they can run. And the algorithmic price-fixing story makes this even darker. In 2022, ProPublica broke a story about a software company called RealPage. RealPage provided revenue management software to large apartment landlords. The software would collect real-time rental pricing data from landlords who were competitors of each other, which under normal circumstances would be price-fixing, illegal under antitrust law. But the data was routed through a third-party algorithm, and RealPage would recommend optimal rental prices to each landlord based on what the collective market could bear. The landlords weren't technically talking to each other. The algorithm was talking for all of them. The Department of Justice opened an antitrust investigation. Multiple class action lawsuits followed. Dozens of major property management companies were named. The allegation that millions of renters across America had been paying artificially inflated rents, coordinated not by a handshake in a back room, but by a server in a data center. ACT 6, the generational math, why this breaks everything. Here's what a house used to mean in America. You bought it in your late 20s. You paid it off over 30 years. By the time you retired, you owned it outright. It was your nest egg, your backup, the thing you passed to your kids or sold to fund your retirement. Home ownership was the escalator, the mechanism through which working-class and middle-class families built intergenerational wealth. Between 1963 and today, the median home price in America has increased roughly 1,600% when adjusted for inflation. Stock market? Up about 1,200%. The single best-performing asset in American history for ordinary people was the house they lived in. And that escalator is now broken for an entire generation. Millennials, the largest generation in American history, are the first generation in modern times projected to own homes at lower rates than their parents at the same age. The average age of a first-time homebuyer in America has hit 35 years old, up from 29 in 1981. That 6-year delay isn't just psychological, it's financial devastation. If a home appreciates 5% a year, roughly the long-term average, a $400,000 house bought at 29 is worth about $730,000 by age 44. The same house bought at 35 is worth about $556,000 by age 44. That's a $174,000 wealth gap from a 6-year delay on one house. Multiply that across an entire generation, across tens of millions of households. The numbers become staggering. And here's the compounding cruelty of it. While millennials were locked out, renting, saving slowly, watching prices climb faster than they could save, the homes they couldn't buy were being purchased by people who already owned homes, or by corporations, or by investors using equity from their existing properties to buy a second or third one. The rich got richer not just in cash, but in assets. Real, tangible, appreciating assets that generated rental income and equity simultaneously. The people locked out got poorer, not in income necessarily, but in net worth, in wealth, in the only currency that actually compounds over a lifetime. Aki 7. The political failure. Who benefits from doing nothing? By this point, you might be wondering, where is the government? This is a national crisis. It affects more Americans than almost any other economic issue. Housing costs are the single largest line item in most household budgets. So why hasn't Washington fixed it? The answer is uncomfortable. The same homeowners who show up to city council meetings to block apartments, they vote at significantly higher rates than renters. In the 2020 election, homeowners turned out at roughly 73% rates, renters at roughly 52%. Politicians who want to be reelected do math, and that math says, don't do anything that threatens home values. The entire structure of American political incentives has been designed, accidentally over decades, through 1,000 small decisions, to protect existing homeowners at the expense of future ones. The mortgage interest deduction, a tax policy that gives homeowners an annual subsidy worth tens of billions of dollars collectively. Property tax assessments that freeze when you've owned a home for years. In California under Prop 13, your neighbor who bought the same model house in 1985 may be paying $1,200 a year in property taxes while you pay $8,000 for buying in 2019. Capital gains exclusions that let you sell a home and pocket up to $500,000 in profit tax-free. Every one of these policies makes owning a home more valuable. None of them help people who don't yet own one. They are policies designed by owners, for owners, and they have been in place, accumulating, stacking on top of each other for 50 years. Act 8. The crash question. Will prices ever come down? Here's what everyone wants to know. What they type into Google at midnight when they're doing the math again and it still doesn't work. Will prices crash? In 2008, they did, catastrophically. But 2008 was different. That crisis was driven by bad loans, mortgages given to people who couldn't afford them, built on financial instruments so complex that the people selling them didn't fully understand them. When the music stopped, the foundation crumbled. Today's market is different in a crucial way. The people who own homes right now mostly bought them with fixed, low-rate mortgages at prices they could afford. They're not going to default. They're not going to be forced to sell. There is no wave of distressed supply coming, no foreclosure tsunami. What we have instead is a slow, grinding squeeze, not a crash, a long, painful plateau where prices stay high, rates stay elevated, and the gap between who can afford to buy and who can't keeps widening. Morgan Stanley, Goldman Sachs, and virtually every major investment bank have published analyses projecting the same basic scenario, a soft landing in housing prices, not a collapse. Prices might decline 5 to 10% in overheated markets. Maybe. But with interest rates still elevated and supply still constrained, affordability doesn't meaningfully recover from a 5% price drop. The monthly payment math barely moves. What would fix it? Economists largely agree. You need either a dramatic increase in supply, millions of new units, or a dramatic decrease in interest rates, or both. The interest rate question is largely out of any one person's control. The Federal Reserve sets it based on macroeconomic conditions. The supply question is entirely political. And as we've seen, the politics are broken. SCA 9, the people building the exits. But here's what's quietly changing. For the first time in a generation, there is genuine political momentum around housing reform. Minneapolis became the first major American city to eliminate single-family-only zoning entirely in 2020. Any residential lot can now have a duplex or triplex. Oregon passed statewide upzoning legislation in 2019, making it one of the first states to override local zoning restrictions at the state level. California passed a series of laws between 2020 and 2023 that allow homeowners to build accessory dwelling units, small secondary homes on their property, with dramatically reduced permitting requirements. In a single year, ADU permits in Los Angeles quadrupled. Montana, historically a conservative state, passed sweeping zoning reform in 2023. The governor signed legislation allowing duplexes in every residential zone statewide. These aren't solutions. Not yet. Not at the scale needed. But they are cracks in a wall that stood for 70 years. And the demand side is shifting too. The build-to-rent sector, where developers build communities of single-family homes explicitly intended to be rented rather than sold, is exploding. In 2022, build-to-rent starts hit a 30-year high. Some housing economists argue this is the market's adaptation. People who can't buy but want the experience of a house, a yard, a garage, space for kids, are renting single-family homes. Supply for that specific demand is finally being built. Others point out the obvious irony. Yet another sector of the housing market being institutionalized, further removing units from the for-sale market, further entrenching the renter class. Both things are true at once. Finale, the real insight. So here's where we land. The housing crisis isn't one problem. It's three interlocking ones. A supply crisis created by 50 years of zoning policy that made it illegal to build enough homes. A demand crisis artificially inflated by institutions treating shelter as a financial instrument. And a political crisis where the people with the most to lose, renters, young buyers, the locked-out generation, have the least power to change anything. These three problems reinforce each other perfectly. Low supply drives up prices. High prices make homes attractive to investors. Investors buying homes reduces supply further. The political will to build more is blocked by the people whose wealth depends on supply staying scarce. It is a closed loop. And it was not designed by a single villain. It emerged from millions of individual decisions, each rational, each legal, each perfectly understandable from the perspective of the person making it. That's what makes it so hard to fix. But here's the insight that reframes everything. The housing crisis is not really a housing crisis. It's a wealth distribution crisis with a housing-shaped face. For the last 40 years, the primary mechanism through which ordinary American families built wealth was homeownership. And for the last decade, access to that mechanism has been systematically blocked by zoning laws, by institutional investors, by interest rates, by political inertia, for precisely the people who need it most. What we're watching is not a market failure in the traditional sense. We're watching the most reliable wealth-building tool in American history get priced out of reach for the generation that will need it most. And the people on the other side of that transaction, the ones who already own, are not villains. They're just people who got there first, which means the solution isn't anger at individuals. The solution is redesigning a system that currently rewards hoarding shelter and punishes trying to find it. That system redesign is already starting in small ways in scattered cities and states. Whether it scales fast enough for the generation currently locked out, that's the question nobody can answer yet. But one thing is certain, the era when you could work a decent job, save for a few years, and buy a house in the town where you grew up, that era is over. And the only question left is whether we build a new one, or whether we just accept the world as it is and hand the keys to the people who can afford to own it.